What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so the corporate press, they're freaking out. It's an unprecedented power grab by Donald Trump. I got this wonderful news article for you guys today, and you're going to love this. You're absolutely going to love this. Let's just jump right into it. This is from CNN, by the way, so the most trusted name in news. Check it out, y'all. What to know about Trump's executive order and unprecedented power grab within the government. So, Trump signed an executive order. We'll get into it. Let's break this down right quick. Okay, so President Donald Trump's executive order grasping far greater control over independent federal agencies embraces a constitutionally questionable theory that presidents dating back to Ronald Reagan have considered and ultimately rejected. Now, I wonder why that is. Let's keep going, and we're going to break all this down. Let's get the news first before we get any of my comments, right? Let's go. In a far-reaching executive order Tuesday, Trump demanded that the White House review regulations at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and other agencies with sweeping power to shape everything from shipping lanes to nuclear power plants. The order is part of a broader push by Trump to consolidate power over independent agencies that Congress intended to be removed from presidential control. It follows a series of controversial firings at those agencies that are being challenged in federal courts, including at the Supreme Court. Here's what to know about Trump's latest executive order. Now, how is this supposed to work? Right quick, let's just break this down. Okay, so Congress creates an executive branch agency that is not controlled by the executive branch. Okay, so that's what they're telling us. Congress passed laws setting up independent agencies because lawmakers wanted the government to be able to perform some functions like overseeing elections or regulating financial markets without direct presidential involvement. The Securities and Exchange Commission, for instance, has in recent years required publicly traded companies to provide additional information to regulators about their internal policies. The Federal Trade Commission enforces antitrust law, and the Federal Election Commission enforces federal campaign finance laws such as donation and spending limits. But support for independence has smacked up against a theory long popular within conservative legal circles that a president should have near complete control over the executive branch and the people who work in it. It is a theory that has increasingly found purchase on the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. How Trump's plan would work. Federal agencies generally must submit proposed regulations to the Office of Management and Budget, a part of the White House. That includes government entities like the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, as well as the Pentagon. When President Ronald Reagan formalized that process in the early 1980s, his administration considered requiring the same sort of review for independent agencies. Ultimately, the Reagan administration decided against it. That was a mistake, in my opinion. Trump's own Department of Justice considered the question during his first administration in 2019 and concluded nothing stood in the president's way. Still, the administration didn't pursue the policy at that time. Trump's new order requires a huge swath of independent agencies to submit regulations for review. In explaining the order, the White House said that those and other independent agencies exert enormous power over the American people without presidential oversight. The agencies, it said, issue rules and regulations that cost billions of dollars and implicate some of the most controversial policy matters. Public Citizen, a progressive advocacy group, has called the move illegal and a giant gift to the corporate class. This is a profoundly dangerous idea for the nation's health, safety, environment, and economy, and for our democracy. Oh, here we go. Let's invoke, it's a threat to democracy. You gotta love these people, right? Like, who ever heard of an executive not having control of the executive? That makes absolutely no sense, but once again, We'll break all that down here in a second. Congress made independent agencies independent of the White House for good reason, Robert Weissman, co-president of Public Citizen, said in a statement. Beyond the technical requirements involving regulation review, Trump's order also mandates far more day-to-day involvement by the White House in the business of independent agencies. The order requires liaisons from the White House to those agencies and insists that its leaders regularly consult with and coordinate policies. That's pretty unprecedented, said Daniel Walters, a Texas A&M University law professor and expert on administrative law. This seems to suggest a real interest in reining in independent agencies. Several independent agencies contacted by CNN on Wednesday, including the SEC and FEC, declined to comment. So, now let's break this down. Okay, so we have this thing, no matter what you want to call it, no matter what you believe, we have this thing called the deep state, right? This is deeply entrenched bureaucrats, these unelected people that nobody voted for, no president appoints. They get hired on by appointees of presidents, sure, but they remain. They remain for a very long time. Now, let's create some federal agencies outside of the executive branch that, we'll just say they're under the executive branch, that nobody really has control over, right? A president appoints. Now, I researched all this. So the president appoints the heads of these places, but they don't have term limits for a lot of these, right? They can stay for a very, very long time. Some of them do. Some of them it's like 8, 10, 15 years, blah, 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 whatever. They can stay for a very long time. That gives these people unprecedented power over the American people. Once again, like the Trump argument here, they exert a lot of control over law. Right? They make up these rules and regulations that don't have to be passed by Congress. So a lot of the law that we live under, right, is outside of Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. Well, not outside of Article 3 because they can be challenged. But before, once again, like they were saying, the Supreme Court, it's bought, purchase on the Supreme Court. What they mean by that is go back to Chevron deference. Okay, that was overturned by the Supreme Court, and for damn good reason, because these independent agencies can just make up regulations as they will, right? And if they get challenged, they go to court, right? So they're not outside of Article 3, the executive. The judiciary. Got that mixed up. Apologize. So bring it to court, but with Chevron deference in place, that was a ruling that set precedent that they generally go by, that says that what they're going to do is they're going to call in experts from that agency that made up the regulation to testify to the judge. So they can, and they usually, the deference part was they defer, the judge will defer his judgment to the expert. Now, that's a recipe for disaster, if you will. That's a recipe for implementing totalitarian control. Like, as far as they can. Now, it's not completely totalitarian. It's just totalitarian over, whatever control the agency exerts, essentially. So, what Donald Trump wants to do is, like you heard, he wants to bring it back. Okay, so that whenever they decide on any rule changes or anything, any regulations, you got to go through the White House. You got to send it to the Office of Management and Budget, right? This is a good idea. This gives much more oversight because currently they don't have a whole hell of a lot of oversight. You might think, well, yeah, Congress, Article 1 is Article 1. They have oversight over everything. Well, that's just funny. Let's read from Wikipedia about these independent agencies of the United States federal government. In the United States federal government, independent agencies are agencies that exist outside the federal executive departments, those headed by a cabinet secretary, and the executive office of the president. In a narrower sense, the term refers only to those independent agencies that, while considered part of the executive branch, have regulatory or rulemaking authority and are insulated from presidential control, usually because the president's power to dismiss the agency head or a member is limited, right? So they appoint the heads of these agencies, but they can't remove them. That's absurd, just on its face. Established through separate statutes passed by Congress, each respective statutory grant of authority defines the goals of the agency must work towards, as well as what substantive areas, if any, over which it may have the power of rulemaking. These agency rules or regulations, when in force, have the power of federal law. So once again, this is essentially unelected bureaucrats making laws. That's not how our Constitution was set up. Our Constitution was set up so that Congress makes the rules that you and I have to live by. The executive branch enforces those rules, and the judiciary mitigates between everything. That's how this is supposed to work. But with Congress making executive branches outside the executive branch, how does that make sense? That is essentially rogue agencies. Now, they're not really like, when I say rogue, that's kind of a hyperbolic term. Now, I'm not saying that they're going and making up all these, insidious laws against the American people, but they can. They most certainly can. And they kind of have, right? They've curtailed gun rights. They've curtailed all kinds of regulations from the oil and gas industry to, all over the damn place. We'll just put it that way. But they live outside of the executive branch. That, to me, just the simple fact that the president gets to appoint the heads of these places, but nobody can fire these people. They can absolutely go rogue. Now, once again, we'll bring it back. Congress has the power of the purse. They can cut the strings to that purse to whatever agency, if they so choose. But you have to get a 2/3 majority to agree upon that. And getting 2/3 of 435 people to agree upon that, yeah, that's kind of hard to do, if you ask me. So a lot of these agencies, they live outside of executive control. Donald Trump is trying to change that, right? We elected Donald Trump to downsize the federal government. If there are agencies within the federal government that do not fall under the executive's control, what purpose do they have, essentially? That to me just spells out a rogue agency, but I didn't do this in a vacuum, if you will. Let's read Article 2 of the Constitution right quick, or at least Wikipedia's summary of Article 2. Article 2 of the United States Constitution establishes the executive branch of the federal government, which carries out and enforces federal laws. Article 2 vests the power of the executive branch in the office of the President of the United States, lays out the procedures for electing and removing the President, and establishes the President's powers and responsibilities. Now, once again, that clearly lays out that anything that falls under the executive branch is under the control of the President of the United States. That's how the President of the United States was intended to function, right? They have control over the DOJ, over the lawmaking body, over the militaries, the commander-in-chief. He exerts a lot of power because the founders knew that in times of emergency, right, when we need to take action immediately, like declaring war, or, if there's a disaster, anything like this, we need somebody with the authority to make people move now. Go do this, help these people, send tanks over here, do whatever the hell you've got to do. That's what the power is supposed to be for, right? The president does not have the power to create and make laws. They do not have that power at all. But having these agencies essentially function this way, they can function as a lawmaking body. That, I don't like that whatsoever at all. I don't think the executive branch should be regulating. Like, if it was up to me, and I know this would be a tough ask, any regulation, anything that essentially would function as a federal law, should have to go through Congress first. Should have to be approved by Congress. I don't care what it is. Now, Trump, I think he could consolidate all these independent agencies, boom, underneath the executive branch, so he has control over these agencies. But once again, any lawmaking power that they have, this should have to be approved by Congress, just outright. That's how I think this was intended to function. So I'm not saying that Donald Trump should just have all this power over all these agencies that essentially have lawmaking power through regulatory means to make up laws, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, sure, consolidate these independent agencies under the executive branch, under the president's control. However, any rules, laws, regulations, whatever, should have to be approved by Congress. Simple majority. We'll put it that way. A simple majority can approve these, right? Because that Congress is supposed to be the ones that make the laws. They are our representatives. They represent us, right? So they should have the final say. We get to decide. This government is of, for, and by the people of these great United States. And that's how I think it should be. You know, the ATF should not be able to make up a law, essentially, that says you can't have this brace for a pistol. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. They should not be able to do that without congressional authority. Now, once again, like I said, when you get down to it, if one of these independent agencies makes up some, widespread regulatory law that just is so authoritarian, it's shocking, right? Congress can cut the strings to the purse right there. They can cut off their budget, essentially, shutting that agency down. But are they going to do that, right? That's not an easy ask to do. So I think, personally, the intention of our Constitution, the way Article 1 and 2 was set up, is that none of these agencies should be able to make the laws unless they're approved by Congress. That's just my opinion. And I think from what I've read, essentially, that is how it should be. So I am all for Donald Trump. But, let's break it down a little bit further. Like, getting back to the corporate press on this, it's a power grab, right? I don't know how this would all be worked out, to be honest with you, because, yeah, there would be a lot of legislating to get around basically what I'm presenting here, right? Because I just still think that's what the Constitution intended. I've read the Federalist Papers. Oh, okay. In full transparency, I read a lot of the Federalist Papers. I haven't read them all outright, but they're very fascinating, if you will. Very, very fascinating. And the way our current government is formed or set up, I don't think that's what the founders intended for it to be like. I don't think they intended for, once again, the ATF to make up laws that are, regulations that function as laws, right? If you have that pistol brace, you're essentially breaking the law. You can be arrested and thrown in jail and charged for that. Now, there's not an ATF officer patrolling your neighborhood street, of course, but the fact remains that is still a possibility, and I don't think that's right, in my opinion. I think any new law, regulation, whatever, should have to go through Congress. These people already do way too much fundraising, in my opinion, just far too much fundraising and just lollygagging that, yeah, they should be forced to do their job. If they're going to do their job, if they're going to get paid by us, they should at least do some work instead of doing all this fundraising and meeting with lobbyists and all this crap. It's just nonsense, in my opinion. So I think this is a good move, right? This is obviously going to go to court, and I have no idea if it's going to get struck down or not. Right? It kind of sounds like it will, but, if the executive order were to institute something like what I'm saying, like it doesn't give any federal agency the authority to make up new regulations without congressional approval, I think that's a great idea, in my opinion. That, once again, that gives you the separation of powers right there. It gives the control of the executive fully under the president, like it should be laid out in Article 2, but also gives Article 1 its full vested powers that it's supposed to have of actually making up the rules that we have to live by. This is why I always tell people it's really important to know your congressman, know their voting record, know exactly what they're doing, because these are the people that make the rules that we have to live by, right? If you don't care about living under some authoritarian, right, then sure, fine. Don't pay attention to politics. Don't pay attention to your congressman, and, let them do whatever the hell they want to. If they want to go out there and promote gender studies, advocate for USAID to fund gender studies in Pakistan, for crying out loud. It's ridiculous. Like, I think Congress needs to be held to account at this point. I still think that we need to get rid of every single congressman out there. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Jeffrey Sachs, by the way. I'm talking to you. What's up, man? I'm loving those comments, by the way. I'm keep them coming. You keeping me in check. Good job, bro. Good job. But I don't know what y'all think about all this, because currently, the way it's set up, if Donald Trump takes control of a lot of this, that doesn't mean he's an authoritarian, right? The corporate press is melting down over this. The leftist pundits are melting down over this, and it's all absurd. I think these people are way too hyperbolic for my tastes, and I just think that they're still trying to go with that evil orange man shtick, and it's just not working anymore. It really isn't, at least not for me, right? Because I see what's going on, and I'm loving every single minute of what's going on. But I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. It blows my mind. Like, Donald Trump is actually trying to take back control of the executive branch, and I think that's a very good idea. However, with one caveat, these agencies should have to go through Congress before any regulation is approved, in my opinion. If Donald Trump wants to bring these independent, quote-unquote, independent agencies, because they're not really under the executive branch, they're just rogue agencies. If he wants to do that, sure. That's great. That's how it should be. That's how it's supposed to be set up. But no regulation should go without congressional approval, in my opinion. But y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching. And y'all try to have a good day. Stay legitical. Peace.